have been traveling on the road quite a bit, and you were up in Canada recently or over the summer.
I went up to Canada too. Yes.
Yeah, how was your experience there?
Oh, thank you. But this is a whole new endeavor for me. When I left Japan, I always had Canada as a place I wanted to start my activity for Soto Zen school. Back in 2012, I moved from Japan to Canada, Eastern Canada, and that's also where my son lives now. It was a remote part of Ontario, Canada. And, I remember the days I was looking for a place I could potentially practice Zen. And then two things I found. One was a Soka Gakkai group. They do lots of chanting, if you know. So as a light community. The other one I thought of starting the activity was a yoga studio that we had. It was a town called Huntsville, small town. And I was hoping to do something, and at the same time, I could immediately see that I was far from ready to do any of the activities in the remote part of Canada. So that realization kind of came. Then, right around the time I had an offer to work for the Japanese American community in Southern California. So at that particular time, I knew intuitively that I have to start from the basic. So in the Japanese American community, there's a memorial service, there's ceremonies that are completely based on a Japanese model, so which I could depend on. Now, while I was serving the Japanese American community, I also started to reach out with the Western Zen communities. And And then thankfully, because of the work that I do for the branch office of Soto Zen School in Los Angeles, they allowed me to travel around in different parts of the US. And again, the Canada wasn't really part of the possibility at that time. But gradually, I started to develop a sense of what the general expectation might be in Canada. So I'm in touch with some Canadian friends, not too many. I had a trip from all the way from Halifax in Eastern Edge. Well, it's not the edge, of course. Canada is a huge country, to Vancouver, and it's not like I saw every single towns and cities, but I've got the sense of where the registered Soto Shu, so Japanese Soto Zen, registered monks are, priests are. They're all Canadians, of course. A couple of them are American people who migrated to Canada too. And then one common thing that I see is everyone's definitely kind of geographically isolated. So lots of things are happening online. And then I'm not even looking at that north end of Canada. I intend to go there one day because I hear there are small groups. So the other thing is the funny kind of Canada-US rivalry thing on top of the border control. So that makes some um, US practice less accessible to some Canadian people. Um, and plus, I'm starting to realize that being working in California, surrounded within this Japanese American community, or people in the US who've been dealing with all the Japanese priests, they have this certain understanding, whether they like it or not, some understanding about the way things happen. So to remove myself and push myself all the way on the beyond the north border, now once again I'm realizing that, boy, I'm not ready again, but different this time. That I have some foundation in the US, just keep building. So it's an ongoing endeavor. And then this is also the process of realizing that how I'm ready in one way, but I'm not ready in another sense. So I'm reaching out to my Japanese friends, American colleagues, both, and in being in touch with some Canadians and practitioners, recognizing their realities. But essentially, I think this is true with everyone who works, you know, in the US as Soto Zen practitioners or leaders. They recognize the reality, conditions of the community, and then work with it while being in touch with the tradition or the organizational or traditional roots. I mean, it's been fun because um, I left Japan just in hope to support this whole new Western Zen movement. And I am definitely grateful that I could start from this Japanese American community, which planted the seeds of all of this. And we can, yeah. But yeah, but then essentially, so this how do I get to be useful to these people is the mindset I want to maintain. So I'm a teacher in relation to several students, but of course I didn't become their teachers with an intention to become their teachers. So that can be a little bit problematic sometimes. But the basic thing is how can I be the resource uh, or that will help them to move forward. And then being familiar with American Zen culture and maintaining that connection with Japanese Roshis will continue to educate me. That's been really helpful. And the other thing is I do not wish to be the hindrance. But I keep that in mind too. So which happens. And I hate to be a hindrance. So as long as I can be some sort of resource, uh, I'd be happy to be around. But if, you know, so I'm also asking my friends, like like if you see me being a hindrance, please let me know. And then I'll rethink about my function to that. So that's kind of my mindset that I'm hope that I'm maintaining.
Yeah, yeah. Well, an amazing way of looking at like that. There's this degree of honesty that I really appreciate that you have with yourself, where you are taking moments to reflect, like, am I ready? You know, or am
Mhm.
I ready to lead in this way? Am I fulfilling my function? You know, am I being a hindrance or am I actually helping out or whatever it is? Um, that I think takes a lot of bravery, especially when you are someone that, because believe you have been you received training at Aichi, is that right? Through
Yes.
so you have a monastic training, and at a time you were the abbot of uh, Iwoji, I think. Yeah,
Oh, thank you. Yes,
yeah,
Iwoji was
Iwoji.
the temple I was
Yeah,
born, raised. Mhm.
yeah, yeah, and so you have a lot of experience in this world, and you grew up in this world,
Mhm.
and yet you still have this kind of reflective element where it's like, well, here I am today in this moment. Like, am I being helpful to this situation? And I'm being sensitive to even the delineations between an American interpretation, like a maybe more of a American, like a Western white Buddhist convert kind of experience
Um,
of Zen, and also the Japanese American
oh, yes.
experience of
Yeah.
Zen, and then also too the Canadian experience of Zen, and
Mhm.
in the various ways that that can be experienced. I mean, like, you're very sensitive to all of that, which I think is a really wonderful thing. And just to kind of push it a little further, like, when it comes to the experience of feeling not necessarily ready, does that mean like, but it's in a different way now? Is it in the sense of, well, I don't know if I have had a personal uh depth that I can share, or like I'm not able to necessarily communicate what I have as far as teachings go, or is it more like I don't know if I'm ready to plant myself in one spot and become a committed member of that community? Is it
Uh,
how do you mean, like, maybe not ready right now?
oh, thank you. Well, that's true. This is something I've been talking about my supervisors and other Roshis too. I mean, Soto Zen school, as you know, emphasizes practice with the body, naturally requires us to be in one place with a physical Sangha community. And it was interesting because a lot of things developed over online, specifically Zoom, like how we're talking now, made everything so much accessible, yet fundamentally our tradition requires us to be in one place. And so I've been looking around from East Coast, West Coast. And according to my respect teacher says, I don't have a teacher, it's my father's passed away, but says, you think too much. You know, Soto Zen school always says, don't think too much. Just, yeah. But I'm also a parent with a child with certain conditions. So that's the part that comes on top of my overthinking nature. Um, so yes, committing to one place. So this kind of sense of lack of readiness, you know, it's always there. I think there's a little bit of a cultural difference because sometimes in Japan, we put the person in the path. I think in North America, I can see how people are careful, extra vigilant as for the timing of letting people move forward. And some people explain to me because this isn't really a part of the culture of this country. So people have to start from understanding the subtle cultural nuances and all that. So it has to be decoded as regulations be expressed. And I think this is really American thing. And Japanese Soto Zen has all the rules, of course. That's accumulation of all this experiences, collective experiences. But we also allow people to be, let's say if somebody wants to be a leader, I may just let them be the leader, stumble, struggle, fail, you know, be shamed, just all kind of things. And then that process itself is a fermentation. It's like helps them to grow. And I think there is that tendency as a Japanese missionary being in the US. But in the US, I can sense how the expectations that one becomes somewhat mature, be ready, then they take this step forward. At one level, it seems very slow, but also deliberate, careful. And it's another expression of dedication, I think. So something that I'm learning for the last 10 years. The other thing is I may use the word healthy ego. This is one of the hot topics, I think. I'm a Japanese and grew up in Japan. And so there's a whole collective culture. And collective may sound, I don't know how people interpret this. It has a positive nuance to us when we use this word. We think of a whole, we function according to the needs of the whole. So our function changes. So I don't think it's just me. Position isn't really the word. Position is a function to what is needed in relation to that circumstances or situations. That includes abbots, that includes like serving in the kitchen. It's all relational. What was I gonna say? Get lost in this thought.
Well, there's like this idea of like of healthy ego.
Oh,
Or,
that's right. So the healthy egos part. So sometimes in this thing, we get lost. It may look beautiful, but I'm like a prime example of a child who grew up in the temple. I loved it. The surroundings, you know, playing hide and seek in the main hall, you know, uh, with my grandfather training me when I was a kid. So all this childhood memories are beautiful. Yet in the process of, if you may say, um, upholding this tradition, arousing this body mind, we talk about in the scripture in a practice. How do we do this when you are your home base, where you're there? And I sometimes compare this to the immigrant's mindset. We have to have the moment to choose to step in. And that's kind of what I was looking for as an individual practitioner. In a sense, it can be egocentric, right? Because it's it's me who wants to do this. And there's this me stepping into this path. I've been thinking a lot about this as I stand sometimes as an interpreter or secretly to the branch office of Soto Zen school. Um, in a very kind of superficial level, surface level, some people look at American Zen, says, oh, they're doing this just so that they can be happier. Right? And so that's, they're just not saying it, but implying it's a bit egocentric, isn't it? And American practitioners look at Japanese counterparts and say, yeah, they may do this beautifully, but there's just honesty. Okay, yeah, but I'm not sure if it's really sinking in. I'm like that. Thanks to the Western Zen traditions and absolute honesty of American practitioners, which I always think is the greatest virtue of American people. I started to finally see the beauty of traditions that I couldn't quite see through the practice happening in North America. So I feel really fortunate. And also as an individual practitioner growing up in the temple with full social expectation to be an abbot, which I did once. But again, my internal things, uh, emotional, psychological health, or physical health, there's a really pragmatic think about uh, the approach I think the Western Zen practitioners see. So I see this as fine line of how much of that is a bit egocentric, or how much of that is actually leading to the wholesome way of teaching practice. It's just constant balancing. And I think this value may shift according to where you are, how new this tradition is. So putting myself over to the other side of Canadian border and coming back to California and traveling different part of the states, I can also see that balancing is also relative in relation to the history of that Sangha community, or the particular, I guess, culture of the region, Midwest, East Coast, West Coast. So I know I may always sound a little bit unsure, confident. That might not be a good thing for some people, but I have to dwell on this not being conclusive when it comes to the right form of practice. We have a traditional form, which we can always come back to resort. But also, sorry, it's a lengthy answer, I guess.
No, it's
Also,
wonderful.
thank you. Yeah, is that when we talk about Soto Zen in Japan, it's also deceiving sometimes, because what is Soto Zen in Japan? There's a standard observance we can look at as a textbook. But if you go to different parts of Japan, they carry on. One most visible differences you may experience is if you have a chance to literally travel around Japanese temples, Soto Zen temples. The main image varies. We maintain the image of the Buddha that was there, that had been there prior to Soto Zen's arrival. And there's a mantras and chanting that sometimes precedes the arrival of our school, honoring just the local way. So when I look at, like, say, White Plum lineage of Maizumi Roshi, or branching streams of Suzuki Roshi or Katagiri lineage, on many other teachers' lineages, and they do things differently. And then, I don't know, again, some people may disagree, but what I've seen, experiences, is exactly the Soto Zen that I know.
Oh.
When I show up with this little badge of, like, I come from the office, they give me that little apologetic look. We do things a little slightly differently, but yes, that's exactly how we are. So
Wow. Oh, that what a wonderful insight. Thank you for sharing that. Just like to, well, on the one hand, like we can get into that honesty in a moment, but just like this idea that there is a reflection too of the way that you've experienced and traveled around Japan and seen how Soto Zen temples
a
and
little bit.
communities, yeah, are set up, in the ways that in what you have seen, you've seen differences. And then when you come to America and Canada, uh, they might be Soto Shu, they might be registered, and yet there
Mhm.
are these own little flavors, and that there is that kind of reflection. Because yeah, I think that in a mindset that I've seen, or what I've been reading about, or when people talk about the differences between the white Buddhist convent convert or otherwise American Zen in that way, or the Western Zen, uh, there is this well, it's not quite the real thing. It's not quite authentic because it's not quite in the same style buildings, or it's not in the same. It's not led by people that are born in Japan, or whatever it is. And yet there is this and therefore in these homes that were converted into temples, or there are brand new structures that are only 10 years old, like, is Zen there, like these kind of differences, these kind of feelings. And then you talk about how if you go out into Japan, from your experience, you've seen some differences, and well, the images are there's other things that are prioritized as far as the Buddha image, or the different mantras and things like that.
Right,
And
right.
so uh
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear about that kind of it's not the same, maybe the amount of differences maybe the same, or different, but the
But
fact that
it's yeah.
there is difference.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. So my temple had a medicine Buddha,
Mm-mm.
and there's the mantra that goes with medicine Buddha. That's a Shingon tradition. And so, to be honest, until I was 13, I didn't even realize that my temple was a Soto Zen temple.
Wow, wow.
I should have heard about that by then, but my recognition was a little different.
Yeah. So does medicine Buddha still kind of figure prominently in your life as you practice it within the Soto Zen context, though?
Ah, I never really thought about it that way, but maybe it does affect a mindset. The person who is at the temple right now, my stepmother, she used to be a pharmacist. So maybe she may be taking this like message that comes with the main image in her own special way. But I haven't really thought about it really. But yeah, I guess some people do, because how do we embody our life in accordance with that kind of the message that comes with the main figure, main image of the temple?
Mm-mm-mm. If you were to have, just like in your mind, in like a it doesn't have to be a permanent choice, but just like if you were to picture a temple that you more or less would have built or created and sustained yourself, um what would be some of the figures or some of the elements of Soto Zen that you would want to emphasize the most, whether it is like in an image way, or if it's in what is chanted, what is addressed in that temple space?
Oh, the culture of the Sangha, culture of the temple, I
Sure,
guess.
yeah, yeah.
Ah, oh wow, thank you. That's a very neat question. I've never built the community from the scratch. Um, I was raised as a youngest child, so I have a tendency to receive something from the elder siblings. And I think it's literally happening to me. Like I get sent to the temple community that were already established and serve the community. Because of that, I honor that thing, the tradition they've established, the predecessors in every community. Sorry, that's exaggeration. Few communities I served, there are some histories of disagreements, little mishaps, or challenging moments. But one thing I like about Soto Zen School is that we honor all of these teachers, regardless. We honor, we pay respect. I add my own personal flavor, which I know comes a little selfishly, which is diversity. Diversity. I myself had an international marriage. Unfortunately, we got divorced, but we had co-parenting, so we're co-parenting partners. Um, so I know the reality of diversity. When we talk about let's be open to everyone, I'm aware of how we can be so aspirational, but we can also be ignorant of the reality of what it means to fully embody diversity understanding. But still, with that recognition of human limitations, I do appreciate or emphasize And that's linked to my own personal experience of Zen, going beyond the perceptions. What is a language that is free from the language? It comes from my background studying linguistics, and the work that I do. We're dictated by the language. Our notions, perceptions are governed by languages and cultures that come along with it. And here we are practicing Zen, going beyond that. But we're talking about this here, right now. And that recognition alone, I think, is valuable and essential to keep the world peaceful. And that peacefulness contains all the makiyaki, confusions, and misunderstanding. That's so, so when I served for Japanese American community, they went through internment camp, and they felt like people like us who come from mainland Japan would not understand the whole experience they went through. Some of the members I met, I'm so grateful. They're so honest with me. And they said to me that sensei, call us sensei, because we used to be language teachers. The missionaries used to be language teachers. We respect you, but we also expect that you would not fully understand like what we have to go through. And I really appreciate that. And so, and then with that experience, we're going through this changing of the generational changes, linguistic changes. So the place I've been sent to was the communities that was in the middle of this transition. And I was able to bring in two wonderful American students. And let's see how you can cultivate this new leadership. They're not Japanese American, no Japanese, but here we are growing, cultivating the Sangha in this country, in the US. So I'm grateful to the Sangha community as much as the two students who are now the leaders of this, serving the Japanese American community. Yeah, and again, diversity. And I feel funny because I'm constantly failing. That's that's the direction. Then the Sangha, or that's what I usually try to bring in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and in I don't know if this was in direct relation to what you were speaking about, but you for a while served as a minister of the Long Beach Buddhist Church, which I believe
Uh-huh.
was a non-denominational Japanese
Right.
American Buddhist church. And
Yes.
so there your work there, and I'm curious about it. If since it was non-denominational in the sense, if you were serving Japanese Americans and whoever consisted or made up the Sangha, if
Mhm.
that your service to them also was for or in cooperation with maybe some Shingon leaders or other Buddhist leaders that would come in, or if you were also serving people that had different Buddhist backgrounds, whatever they might be, and what that experience was like when you were
Oh, thank you.
serving a diversity of Buddhists or otherwise.
That was a very interesting experience, and the members are super nice, such nice people. I can't emphasize this. Also, there were like some of them come from fishing village called Terminal Island. That's now part of the Los Angeles airport. I'm sorry, Los Angeles port.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, there's one Buddha statue, and the emphasis in terms of doctrine was Dhammapada. And I wasn't quite like discouraged to talk about Dogen's teaching, but the emphasis they had was um, the universality or accessibility to all Buddhist people, whether they come from Pyolan Buddhist school or Nichiren Buddhist school, because these are the people who were released from internment camp, and they built this building, which looks more like a church, but they built it that way. And so, yes, on one hand, they are open to all people. But what I observed, I think I realized and learned was this is kind of this particular community is based on the Hawaiian Soto Zen mission. Hawaiian Soto Zen mission is interesting. They have a longest history. They cultivated their own sort of Japanese American Buddhist Soto Zen culture, very independent. And then Long Beach kind of carries on that particular style and tradition, whether the members are fully aware of that or not. But that's a historical connection that I saw. And I think they were approached by the Pure Land Buddhist School, other Buddhist schools. But again, this is my sense and observation. I was never there in history, so maybe I'm not the right person advocating this. But what I see something as they value is that shared collective Buddhist experience that may go back to an internment camp. Everyone was in the same place. That's where this whole harmony, collaboration, empathy developed as fellow Buddhist, Japanese American Buddhist community. And so Los Angeles has a very unique group called Los Angeles Buddhist Temple Federation. We celebrate Buddha's birthday once a year. You know, with the generational change and also some immigration challenges, policy challenges, and all that, we are getting less members now, but it's still ongoing, and we're maintaining this connection. We put our hands and we say Namu Kie Butsu, Namu Kie Ho, Namu Kie So, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and that's what I chanted for this community. That's the legacy of the parents and grandparents. And they were so respectful to their roots. So for me, to suddenly show up as Japanese who doesn't know anything about what they went through, say, hey, let's talk about diversity. Let's bring in new people. How arrogant is that? I converted this storage space because, you know, I remember the days when they were really hesitant to bring in all this non-Japanese American people are suddenly showing up. And then they call this place, Zendo space, sanctuary. They adopted all the Christian terms. And I'm not an expert in the history. So I hear two stories. One story is that they had to do it that way so that could be more socially acceptable. Who had absolutely no understanding of these things. The other thing was it was more effective for the people at the time to approach that way. But anyway, so when these students came, I was really happy, but I had to create a separate space because we have random people coming. You know, we hear this similar stories with Shinju Suzuki Roshi and then people who show up in jeans and t-shirt to this Sokoji temple. This is a place their parents and grandparents protected. So we want to be respectful to that generation. So when the students came, we sat, of course, we did Zazen practice. But one of the conditions I had to tell them was you can sit, but you also have to come to the social hall, drink coffee, eat cookies. And maybe these are often Japanese Americans, you know, we eat fish, we eat meat. We sometimes have a fundraising where we do this teriyaki chicken and then chow mans, you know, it's all this kind of and we cover it in grease. And then, you know, that is the practice happening here. And if you think you want to just sit in the meditation hall and that's all that you need to do, you're not corresponding. You're not embodying that empty nature of the practice. And it was good for me because I didn't have to say no to these people. They usually kind of slowly faded away. But those who really see through the nature of practice they're really dedicated Zen practitioners. Of course, they do Zazen all the time, but they're also ready to come and join, let go of that practice, and focus on the chanting for the members, and being most importantly, paying respect to the members. So we're really lucky that way that we have such students, and that I could also leave it to them. So that was another thing. I was there, people said, Sensei, you're good. And I was really grateful for that. But I have to tell them, well, it's good, but it's not good. Because to think that I'm here forever, to think that just because you have someone here solves everything, I think it's good for a while, but enough when you think of long term. So I'm grateful to the members too, who embrace this little, little thought-provoking
Yeah.
approach I took, embrace these American students, and then they're cultivating that. So my basic belief, again, a lot of teachers I'm sure will disagree, is that presence of the teacher is so important. But equally, absence of the teacher, I always think is important. Again, that's just my personal thought from my own experience with my teacher and the students.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. Well, and it is it's important. I think I find it important that you described that experience of having these uh American people that were coming in and and just being sensitive to everything around that, where it's like, well,
Uh-huh.
there are generational changes, there are the time is moving on, and cultures and dynamics and cities and city structures are changing,
Yeah.
and yet the the tradition element, the historic element of this is very sensitive and very important to maintain. And like, how does that conversation happen? How does that integration happen? Of course, respect is what's necessary. Respect is like a thing that is so important to maintain the integrity of everyone and to make sure that no one is doing something that's uncomfortable. But I really appreciate how you discuss that, because it's there's so many elements and there's so many different people coming at it from different places. Um, and and yeah, like in a more smaller example, it's not necessarily social in the same way, but I do find that uh, myself, I practice at a Japanese American Zen temple, and there is the zazen that happens, and there's chanting that happens, and there are ritual elements that happen there too. And then afterwards, something that our minister or reverend stresses after every time they conclude a ceremony is that now we're going to go clean, because cleaning is part of this practice. Like, that is part of it. And then you go around and you're cleaning toilets, you're picking up trash outside, you're doing all these different things, and I do what I'm happy to welcome it, but I do welcome that practice element to it too, because you're taking care of the building, you're taking care of the community, you're taking care of everything. So I do appreciate that element where, yeah, and then we drink tea, and sometimes we have cookies,
Oh, yeah.
and that's part of it too, right? And that's certainly part of it. Get to know these people that you're sharing space with, and
Mhm.
you have had such a fascinating uh, vantage when it comes to the American and Canadian Zen experience, where, I mean, yeah, you have been in a few different spaces, and very different spaces within the Los Angeles area, Southern California area. And you've also gone to Nebraska, I think. You've done some things out there,
Yeah.
and different states. And it's to me, it's so fascinating, because you're just seeing so much of what this idea of what Zen is in America. And I was just curious if there's a place that you are most curious to go to within an American context, to see or to visit something that you've heard about, or if not, if there's a place that you want to go back to and reconnect with that Sangha community.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for bringing it up. I mean, I get to travel thanks to the mission that I'm assigned to do. And yeah, I feel quite privileged, like literally privileged, because I get to do this in relation to the function that I play. So I'm only a function. So I never expected that I would get to travel this much. Um, One community that I'm interested in reconnecting is in Montreal. I mean, all the communities that I travel and get to see they have their unique challenge. Isolation is a common thing. Everybody, no matter the size of the temple, the community, they say they feel a little bit isolated. I think it just depicts the real sense of how we are practicing. And the other aspect is the more I get to know the Sangha, the more Sanghas I realize I do not know. There's an increasing number of small size Sangha communities all around. Now, going back to the Montreal, I met them a while back. I was traveling in Eastern Canada, part of it because that's the closest city that my son is, big cities. But culturally, I don't know if this thing exists, like San Francisco compared to Los Angeles. Like some cultural things, like every city has that, but also in relatively, there's more powerful cultural kind of a history of cultures in Montreal. Oddly enough, that city reminds me of Tokyo in terms of how neat and how people dress. And then some people are nice, and there are clearly people who are not exactly nice. That was my experience. I mean, so it's like, I don't know, this is gonna be broadcast. So and I think I feel really bad. I think it's connected to that, my experience that I don't speak fluent French. So they have stronger ties or sense of belonging to some European culture. Canadians have this sense of belonging to European cultures. And they have that strong tie with France. Interestingly, their connection with France reminds me of how Japanese American people feel connection to Japan. They go to their countries and they love the cultures, the roots, but they're also seen as someone from outside of the country. But I think because of that, the emphasis on that value gets stronger and grow. So as many people say, like the Japanese American people maintains that old school like mentality of values, traditions that may not longer be in their country. Quebecers carry some French cultures, as I hear. It's not so much in France. Or so they have a certain view and perspectives that's a little different from the other parts of the US or North America. There are a group of people who train in decimal lineage, European, sanghas. Part of the reasons I wanted to approach Canada is to see, I guess this is something that I'm really contemplating on. We are, including the sensei in the Reverend at your temple and Sokoji Temple. I truly respect him for his integrity as a Japanese international teacher. So what he's really sharing is what he's bringing that fits so well with the identity of the temple and the community, particularly the Japantown. So my way is a little more kind of yielding, which is good and bad, kind of blending in. So it sometimes gets a little wishy-washy. And again, this contemplation on what it means to be international teacher. In Japan, you meet people from Greek, Argentine, Taiwan, Hong Kong, sometimes from Iran, Bangladesh. We're in the US. So yes, these people come to the US as immigrants and settle to be Americans, yes. In the context of Soto Zen, I wonder if this movement of Zen in the US it's American Zen growth. Every country, every region developed their own unique culture. Like Hawaii has one. I'm sure South America has something. Yeah. So I'm fully appreciating this streams of movements, but I also have this kind of curiosity, how that would affect fitting or not fitting in a broader global Soto Zen movements. That particular independent spirits of American practitioners creates a strong Zen culture. And there's that question. So in one level, that's international mission that I'm assigned to serve for sure. But when you look at Mexican side or Canadian side, or relationship with European Zen practitioners or South American practitioners, how is it? And that's also in relation to Japan. So, again, we can just drown in this endless thinking process, but this immense curiosity that I still have. And again, it has nothing to do with negating one thing or another thing. It's just what it means to be fully, I guess, develop individually as international missionary. So sorry. Yeah.
No, that was wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and I think that it's a really important thing too, where you're able to acknowledge your own distinction between approach, whereas someone that is an international minister or reverend that comes into a maybe Japanese American or otherwise community, they could approach it one way, and then your what you're driven to do or what you feel is important, there's a give and take. There can be kind of a disruptive quality to it, where like maybe a community might not be ready in one way or otherwise, and yet you are very, very sensitive and aware of those needs. And so and then when you extrapolate that into what global Soto Zen movements can be like, and where there's this vast diversity, and there's all this like very intense depth of history and movements and cultures and subcultures and even neighborhoods, and like
Yeah,
even
yes.
just like even like cities can be different, but neighborhoods can be different. And being sensitive to all of that, and it can be a great deal to wrestle with. And I wanted to know too, when it comes to your experience with travel, with engagement with people from different communities, whether they're Canadian or and otherwise, like elsewhere in the world. Um, you do have a background in language. You have this linguistic element, and I know that you at one point you taught English to children and worked with Japanese, Brazilian, and Peruvian communities, and like advocated for uh, linguistic maybe rights or care for children and
Versus,
things like that. And you worked with like a city council for that. Language is very deeply important to you, it sounds like. And what has your experience been like when you are, I don't know if you have like a whole Rolodex full of languages that you're familiar with, or that you have like a facility in, but how does language and Zen kind of come together for you? And like, is there something important? Is there a practice element to talking to somebody in their own language, or at the very least being sensitive to the cultural dynamics when you are engaging in Dharma conversations or leading a community?
Oh, thank you. Well, the moment you talk about language, I mean, that's something I love deeply, but I feel terribly ashamed at the same time. As soon as I picked up the language, I mean, honestly, I felt comfortable right away with English, even before I was able to speak much. So it's an interesting thing. But then, English is such a dominant language. And I tried to pick up Spanish. Uh, Honestly, I tried, but then I feared because I wasn't that confident in with English at the time. But then now I'm in California for over 10 years and I'm not, then I can barely communicate with the Spanish speaking community there. The same with French in Quebec. So yes, so I don't ever claim myself to be a language expert. I just was lucky to get exposed to this language. And then, but that's also the gateway. That was the way into Zen, the way I made a re-entry to Zen practice. Um, just the things we take for granted, the views. As a teenage kid, you know, you can immediately sense, like we use the word, let's say, window in Japanese, mado, window, and that's actual thing. But if you talk about like more relational thing, like interconnectedness, goen, we do our best, and then we look up the dictionary. Well, and then the dictionary always lies to us, saying it's the meaning of this word. No, it's not. We intuitively know these are two different things because we are looking at the same phenomena using a different framework. We believe that framework is the reality, but that's not what it is. So Zen made perfect sense to me when it says don't depend on the language because it's only the framework we're using. And we're subject to this relative interpretation. And that's the only way we can interpret the world. So it just, to me, it was really humbling. And it continues to be. And that's where I succeed relatively. And that's also where I fail. So for me, it is the practice of Zen in a very personal level. And
Absolutely.
that's,
Mhm.
yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, 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 please, please, please.
Yeah. So in that sense, I feel really lucky that I get to serve like other Roshis as an interpreter. And then, uh, but I always try to keep in mind in terms of in the like when I do translation, that little mysterious unreasonable confidence. Like I kind of have to make believe that nothing is untranslatable. Nothing is untranslatable. Just I keep reminding myself, maybe so that I don't freak out often. But
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of responsibility. Because I know that like even for like Sokoji, which celebrated its 90th anniversary recently, you served as kaisetsu, I believe.
oh yeah,
And you weren't just interpreting language, you were also interpreting the events. You were describing the events and you were kind of creating like a lot of and that was just you were talking like you were going through all morning. You were just kind of helping uh the maybe non-Japanese or maybe even people that aren't familiar with every single ritual element of Soto Zen ceremonies. You were helping understand that. And I understand the your that that kind of reminder of like nothing is uh not where is it like everything is can be translatable where it's like yeah you have to if you're helping two people converse, you have to be like, I don't know what he said. I like, I don't know if I can tell you what he said. It's just not going to work. No, so I do hear that. Um, yeah, that's wonderful. And I understand that we're kind of coming close to the end of our conversation. I really enjoyed it a great deal. And I just had like two questions that are relatively small. You're welcome to interpret them however you wish. They are one is if you have anything to promote. I don't know if you're working on anything or if there's a foundation or a cause that you're familiar with that you'd like to get more eyes and ears on and just kind of get something out. And also too, the second question is if you have any advice for somebody that's going along the Buddhist path that is advice that you would have wanted to have heard along the way at some point, whenever it would have been helpful for you.
okay, thank you. So the first one is something we emphasize at 100th anniversary. You know, I work as somewhere in this connecting this different streams of cultures and groups. Let's say Western Zen, Japanese Zen, but that's not where the thing is happening. I think we want it emphasized when the Dharma wheel turns. Sorry, a little exaggerating this, but the wheel turns when the people, two different cultures, not right here, but when people on this end start to work things around, and that's where the bigger circle starts around. So people like me be lucky enough to be kind of here. Yes, it's wonderful, but when we keep working, it's gonna be like this always. I can make myself happy. but that doesn't really take us to any place. So I just encourage, so you coming to see this teacher sensei at Sokoji Temple, that's where things are turning. And the people who are in the remote place go all the way to Japan, communication happens. That's just a thing that I always want to see continue. So that's one thing. And the people who are practicing Zen, I have lots of questions. Gosh, a drowning questions about traditional forms, rituals. It's a shared experience for multiple generations. For me to encounter Western Zen, it confirmed, maybe you can say it verified some of this subtle intuition, which I didn't know even who to share with. I felt too embarrassed because I wasn't sure. But for me, this whole deepening of understanding is a series of events where it confirmed what I wasn't 100% sure. So it's kind of this wrapped like a unpaved road that I had, like a very thin, like narrow path that I was not quite confident, but then through interactions with Roshis and other teachers and practitioners, collectively, it's like a river. You start to meet the river going in the same direction. Um, that was my personal experience. I had some solid 5-year period I stayed away from the practice. So if people are going through that phase, I went through that. So, and I just hope that you make another encounter with some wonderful Zen practitioners and teachers. That's all I can say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's a tricky spot, and so like kind of remaining open is so important. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Reverend Yokoyama, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It really has been a treat, and I think it's a really wonderful thing that you do, where you are a figure that goes to so many different communities all over the world, and offers what you have to offer with that also just that personal reflection of and that honesty of like, well, am I ready for this? What can I do here? What is my function? And continuing to ask that it's very inspiring. It's something that I think that even just someone can take to their own personal practice. It's like, am I walking this path the way that I intend to? And always kind of looking again at it is just such a wonderful thing. So thank you for your work, but also for all the reminders of that kind of practice.
Thank you. I can only do this because of the leaders. So deep bow to the Sangha communities. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for your effort. It was wonderful to talk to you.